Morning, fish keepers. Cam here from the fishroom.co.nz. We've got John on board. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. Good to be back.
That is good. That is good. All right, we've got ourselves a guest sitting in the wings. We'll bring him up. Good evening, Mr. Ethan. How are you?
Hello, I'm all right. Had a bit of a hectic day at uni, but other than that, we're good.
Cool. Thank you very much for joining us. It is greatly appreciated. Do you just want to tell the people who you are and yeah, basically who you are?
Okay, so I'm Ethan. I'm a master's student at Bangor University. I'm studying zoology with animal behaviour. I've been absolutely obsessed with aquariums for it's coming on 10 years now. It's about half my life or so. And I mean, outside of fish keeping, I'm a swimmer. So between the fish keeping, the uni work revolving around fish, and swimming, my entire life just revolves around water, basically. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Just out of curiosity, how many towels do you go through a week?
Usually, I mean, between everything, I've 5 or 6 at least. Just a load on rotation. Just
must be constantly just drying yourself with the amount of water you're playing with. Awesome.
Oh, yeah. It's never ending.
So how did you get started in zoology and specifically with Amazonian fish species?
So I was always like obsessed with animals as a kid. I was one of those where my parents had a zoo membership, so they took me to, I think it was Chester Zoo most weekends, and I was just absolutely obsessed. And it was always, they knew I was going to end up doing something with animals. Mm-hmm. And then it was only really in kind of secondary school, so when I was maybe kind of 12, 13 or so, that I kind of actually started taking notice of fish. My parents always had a tank in the corner of the room, was not interested. I always used to be kind of a mammals person. Now I couldn't be further from it. I think it was originally, I saw a tank at a friend's house that had some swordtails in it and some baby swordtails in it. And I kind of went, that's cool. I didn't realize that you could like have breeding projects and stuff. And so that kind of set me off on the rabbit hole. And I think originally I was like, oh, I can get good at this. I can make money out of this. And then almost instantly realized that is not feasible at all. And then kind of just fell in love with every other aspect of it. And especially with then what my degree has gone into, I've realized that it's basically observation of behavior is the bit that I'm most interested in. So doing everything I can to kind of replicate a habitat so that I can get the chance to observe natural behavior or the chance to observe courtship behaviors or that kind of thing. So that's normally why I pick certain species and that kind of thing. But then, so in my hobby, I've always gone more kind of soft water, South American, Southeast Asian, 99% South American though. And then as soon as I've got to uni, I'm now working with soda lake cichlids. So from like Tanzania. And it was only after coming to uni that I've had to start looking at kind of Rift Lake African cichlids, and it's just completely different to. I still think it's kind of ironic that the first pieces of work that I have my name attached to it are for a group that I didn't spend my life working on. It was only just picked them up just a bit later on, and I think I've probably got a completely different perspective on like all the Malawi stuff and some of these adaptive radiations than a normal hobbyist, because normal hobbyists get into that kind of thing like, oh, pretty colors, it's a cichlid, it's got cool colors, and I'm looking at it more from an evolutionary standpoint and looking at the adaptive radiation of kind of how it's all kind of starting from one species ending up in many species. And it's interesting learning about a new part of the world just from a science perspective as opposed to from a hobbyist perspective, and then almost comparing notes and seeing where kind of this crossover.
Has that changed how you look at things as a hobbyist?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's led me to I go much more in depth with scientific papers now, and much more about trying to look more about the habitat, evolutionary relationships between species, and that kind of thing. Yeah. So I feel like most people, when they're looking at a new fish species, their first port of call isn't necessarily Google Scholar. But yeah, it's kind of definitely the critical thinking aspect of it as well, and just kind of breaking down and questioning everything. And that's definitely changed a little bit, having looking at it from more of an academic standpoint as opposed to just box standard hobbyist standpoint, if that makes sense.
It just gives you kind of a deeper relationship with the habitat of the fish and the fish itself, as opposed to just a fish in an aquarium. You're going beyond that, and you're getting just like a massive wide angle view on it all, really.
It's making sure that kind of the trying to get a better understanding of the habitat, because once you've got a better understanding of the habitat the fish is from and the kind of niches that it's utilizing, the better your chances are of being able to kind of essentially try and recreate that niche in an aquarium, so you've got a better chance of observing some of the natural behaviors that they are exhibiting. Hang on, I'm just going to see if I can make my audio my sound a little bit louder. I don't know if that's, there we go, that should be a bit better. Okay, I should be able to hear a bit better now.
I'm curious to know, what is it that you're actually observing? Is there like specific things that you in particular are trying to find out, discover, work through, or is it just a general observation for your studies? Like, how does that work?
Do you mean in the uni work or in
kind of in the uni work?
So with the uni work, so I'm working with a group of cichlids called Algalapia, and part of what we're doing in that is mate choice experiments. So we've got quite a detailed ethogram of all of the different possible behaviors that we know of that they will exhibit, and when we're doing a focal watch of them, we have to basically sit perfectly still in front of the tank that they're in, and with a kind of either a laptop or notebook and pen, and using that ethogram, note down every single behavior that they're exhibiting within that 10 minutes, so that we can kind of build a data set out of it. And that
sounds like a dream. To be told to do that, it sounds fantastic.
It sounds like it to begin with, and it's great to be, but once you've done once you've been sitting in the same chair for like 2 hours doing 10-minute replicates over and over again, it can get a little bit mind-numbing, and you end up having to take a few minutes break in between each one just to kind of reset your brain and stuff. But it's definitely interesting sitting down and just being able to kind of almost break apart what each of these behavioral interactions are, and trying to figure out, because we've got to note down kind of what the behavior is, how long it's lasting for, and what other fish are involved in that behavior. So yeah, and then kind of figuring out then relationships between the different fish in the tank, which one's more dominant, and then actually creating a data set from that as well, so you can actually, well, statistically find out which one is more dominant, which one is kind of like which male is more popular with the ladies in the tank. It's really interesting then being able to find that all out from just you sitting and watching. Then you end up having actual data of, okay, this is the most dominant fish in the tank, this is like the most kind of sexually active female in the tank, that kind of stuff. And yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Has it made breeding in your own aquariums at home easier?
Not sure really. So the stuff that I've been breeding at, well, in like the tanks behind me, I've got a couple different loricarids. So I've got some Ancestress L107/L184, the brilliant bristlenose, and got some 66s in that tank. But so that's obviously very, very different behaviors to the cichlers that I'm looking at. But yeah, it has kind of allowed me to, like, I'm noticing more that I'll pick up on new behaviors more, and I'll, from sitting watching and go, oh, that's different. I've not seen them do that before. And it's ones like, I've got a pair of coral red pencils in that tank as well, and I was watching them spawning the other day, and
Nice.
it was, yeah, absolutely amazing to watch, because I've never seen that before. And yeah, being able to observe new behaviors is, yeah, amazing to me. That's why I've just got myself, I mean, it's not on the screen, there's a little tank right by my bed which has a pair of beta-trinoides in it, because I can't wait until I get to observe that kind of that mouth breeding behavior, and I really hope I'm there when they do that kind of the passing off of the eggs. I finally got myself, after a long spell of not having any cichlids, well, not any breeding cichlids, there is a Nanacara anomala female up in that top one. She's got a few babies at the moment. Had to say the male out because she was beating the crap out of him, because there's no other fish in the tank for her to divert the aggression to. But yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure whether it's changed much of the breeding, just because the stuff I'm breeding is so different to the stuff that I'm working on, genuinely. I mean, I can give you a good rundown of the whole, of basically the whole situation with the soda lake cichlers, the alcalapias, if you want, because I personally find that very interesting.
Yeah, just before we do that, I am curious to know the nanocaras. Obviously, the females are quite aggressive after spawning compared to the males, which is a bit of a different trait. Normally, it's kind of the other way around. Why do you think that is? What makes them different, or what makes that behavior so prominent with them?
So I've seen it be quite different in different people's kind of scenarios. So the females seem to have this innate urge to be maternal, be protecting the eggs / fry, whatever, from the get-go. And it seems to be when there are other fish, from what I've seen from other people's tanks, the female would kind of protect the inner circle where the fry are. The male would do a slightly wider perimeter, kind of fending off fish a bit further far. But when you're in quite a confined tank, that can end up with, if the other little fish can't get away, for example, it was either him or her, they killed a load of cardinal tetras, when they first spawned, when they were in their quarantine tank. And yeah, it seems to be they have this, especially the female, she just has this urge to, so much this urge to protect. She'll see anything as a threat. When there's lots of other fish, they seem to work well as a pair. And I've seen that as a theory for, especially some of these larger Central American cichlids, of having dithers in there to strengthen a pair bond. But equally, then once you take away all of any kind of dithers, and the only fish left in the tank is him, she still has that need of like, I need to kind of have a go at something, and so she just basically turns on him because she sees him as the only possible threat to the babies, and he isn't actively doing anything because there's nothing else in the tank for him to protect either.
That might explain why when all the kids go to school, my wife turns on me. You could be onto something there, Ethan. And I can see that because I know she's not watching this, so we'll see.
I've had that exact experience with mine. I had a good spawn, and then she just went nuts on him. First time round, he kind of held it in the corner, so to speak. Second time round, that was it, and she totally dealt with him. And I always found that a really interesting trait that they exhibit. I assume that the tank might have been a bit too small, but I'd never thought of having dither fish in there as well. And saying that being it was only a 2-foot tank, like a breeding tank, other fish in there probably would have made it too small, and they probably would have had the same fate anyway. So it's really curious that you say when you add the dither fish that she'll just go for them as opposed to the male, and it kind of makes it a little bit more harmonious than if you've just got them as a pair.
But I think you would only want dither fish if they're A, robust enough, and B, the tank is big enough so that they can get away.
Yeah, and I would have thought that the 2-footer would be too small for that anyway. But 3 foot might have been an acceptable amount for that to kind of work. Yeah. What about in terms of keeping them in a trio? I'm assuming that the female that's got the fry would still be the same on another female or another male in the tank. You're just a threat regardless.
I mean, from what I've read, supposedly they don't make permanent bonds. This species, it's more of a temporary pair bond whilst they have the egg/fry. And I have heard about this species being kept in like a harem setting with one male and a couple of females in quite a large tank. I think it was even on, it might have even been on Seriously Fish, I can't remember, with mentioning something about each female needing, having a territory of about 45 centimeters square. So if you had, say, a 5 or 6 foot tank, each female might set up shop at each end of the tank, and the male would spawn with one, protect them whilst she has the fry, and then as they grow up a bit, he might go off visit the other female.
Yeah.
But again, I've got no experience with that. That's just theory, I guess.
Yeah. I definitely noticed that after she knocked out the male, she seemed to sulk, or she still seems to be sulking quite a bit. Totally different fish to when there was a male in there, which I thought was really interesting as well. Like, it just looked like she was sulking and unhappy to be by herself, which I thought was quite interesting.
Okay. Mine, I've not noticed much difference in mine. She just kind of seems to see me as the big food monkey, and anytime I'm near the tank, equally, I don't know whether it sees me as a big food monkey or wants to be aggressive towards me. So it could be either of those. But yeah, I've not noticed much of a difference in her behaviour. Did you say that your female like took out the male, like completely?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mine had quite a lot of torn fins. I think if I left him in there another week, he would have been a goner. But he's now in that bottom tank and doing quite nicely for himself.
Yeah, probably a bit of lack of attention on my part. Dealing with lots of tanks, sometimes you just miss things. But yeah, they were good. They spawned content. He kind of disappeared. I just assumed he was sort of hiding, or because the tanks are vertical on, or just at the other end of the tank, sort of thing. And then all of a sudden, I was, hey, you're not alive anymore. So yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, not ideal.
Yeah. No, far from ideal. Being it was my only male that I had, with 2 or 3 females that I had hanging around, so that made it even less ideal.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is what it is.
Mm.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about the Soda Lake cichlids, it's not a fish that I'm familiar with whatsoever. It's definitely not one that's allowed here in New Zealand, but I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that are very interested in them.
Yeah. So there's one kind of more famous Soda Lake cichlid that's a little bit more well known because it does exist in the hobby in kind of smaller amounts, which is Alcalapia alcalica. That is one of 4 different species of Soda Lake cichlids. So the genus it's a subgenus Alcalapia, is a kind of a little subgenus nestled within Oreochromis. So that's all of your kind of Nile tilapias and even your food fish tilapias, that kind of thing. So then kind of nestled within that group. They all have one common ancestor that was present in this quite large lake. And then over time, that lake, then the water level dropped, splitting it into 2 lakes. So we have Lake Magadi and Lake Natron. Now, one species is found in Lake Magadi, that's Alcalapia grahami, and then there are 3 species found in Lake Natron. Now, these are considered essentially the most hostile lakes in the world that can support life. I don't know if there are more hostile ones that don't support life, but these ones are essentially considered the most hostile lakes in the world. So for Lake Natron, which is the one I'm more interested in because that's where the species I'm working on are from, nothing can live in the main body of the lake because pH is about 12, and like the salt content is through the roof. It's absolutely ridiculous. But then there's these kind of little satellite springs kind of dotted around the outskirts of the main lake. And this is where kind of the fish are found because it's a little bit more habitable. I say a little bit more. pH is still a little over 10. So bear in mind that pH is a logarithmic scale, so that's 1,000 times more alkaline than most people's tap water is. And so, yeah, pH about 10. Temperature on a cool day, you're looking at about 32, 33. On a hot day, you're looking maybe up to about 44, 45.
Oh, right.
Now, that's going to cook most fish alive. But these guys are somehow adaptable enough that they've made it work. And they've even since managed to diverge from their one common ancestor between the 4 into 4 distinct species with a potential kind of, I think Alcalica's got 2 slight subvariants. So potentially more in the future, we'll see. So they're found in distinct kind of satellite springs around the main body of the lake. Sometimes these springs are connected with extra rains and stuff. Other times they are kind of just isolated from each other. So with the geographic isolation of them, that kind of makes sense for how multiple different species may have formed originally, kind of getting the 3 natron species from the 1. But where it gets interesting is some of these satellite springs, yes, only have 1, but then some of the satellite springs have 2 species. And I think a couple of the satellite springs even have all 3 species living in exactly the same place, coexisting. My supervisor's got videos of them that he collects from when he collected them originally, of kind of them all just swimming intertwined, all three species in the same place. And it's essentially the overarching question is, why are they staying separate? Because they're so closely related, and being cichlids as well, that they can hybridize like that. Put them in lab conditions, put the male of one, female of another, they will breed no problem.
Wow.
And essentially the overarching question is, why are they staying separate, even though they've now kind of ended up all back in the same habitat? So there is some kind of key morphological differences between the different species that help them with specific niches. It's mostly down to the feeding, different feeding niches. So Alcalica has got a slightly more forwards facing, it's called a more terminal mouth shape. It's a bit more forwards facing. It's the most standard looking of their mouths. Then Alcalapia undulani has got some quite pretty yellow or orange coloration, which the other species don't have. And then its mouth is a bit narrower, a tiny bit downwards facing. And then Alcalapia latilabris has got a very wide, very downwards facing mouth with kind of these big Velcro-y lips. And that's just so that each species can kind of fully utilize a specific feeding niche, whether that's kind of scraping off of rocks or taking mouthfuls of substrate to try and get what little nutrition survives in that horrible lip. So there's some theories as to whether it could just be that in the event of a hybrid being produced, it may just, the intermediate mouth shape that hybrid has may not allow it to fully utilize either of the specific.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. It could be that they know that the offspring that they would produce wouldn't survive or thrive, as well as each individual species should do.
Yeah. So that's one of the kind of theories. That one's quite hard to test for in a lab, especially. And then the other one, which is the easier one to test for, which is the one that we're working on at the moment and has been worked on by a couple of different groups of, a couple of different groups of people, is to do with more mate choice experiments and whether there's something actually having been separated, whether the female, whether the female latilabris, whether they just really like the mouth shape of other male latilabris, so we'll only mate with those if given the choice between a male of two different species. So it's the mate choice experiments that we're working on at the moment, and I'm mostly looking at so my work's kind of contributing kind of hybrid success in those mate choice experiments, whereas other, like the previous studies that have been done, are mostly around kind of the pure species and their mate choice preferences. So yeah, I think that's the general gist of Calapias.
I've got a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Is the lake landlocked?
Yes. I can't remember if there's maybe one little river going into it. I would have to look at a map. I can't remember exactly. I think it might be landlocked though. There's certainly no new fish coming anytime soon.
Cool. And is there other fish in the lake with them? Is there other fish cohabitating in that very, very crazy sounding water conditions?
The Alcalapias are the only species that have managed to survive there.
Wow.
There are no other fish there at all. They're very much extremophiles.
Is there any
in-
crustaceans or anything living in the substrate or
um,
anything?
there might be some small invertebrates and stuff, but nothing major. There's some quite famous pictures of like often when you Google Lake Natron, it's a bit of a not really a touristy spot, but there's some quite famous pictures of, because of how salty it is, it kind of petrifies animals that fall into it and kind of turn them to stone. So there's it's most famous for a big breeding colony of flamingos, which sit right in the middle of the lake because nothing can get to them there. And so there's some quite amazing pictures of these kind of dead, petrified flamingos that have essentially been turned
There's
to
two lakes where my parents stay in Spain. There's two lakes. They're like identical shaped lakes, but one's pink because of the salt quantity, and the other one's white. And there's flamingos that live in the middle of that, and they've got such a high salt content in the water as well that you can kind of almost float like the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if it's got any fish though.
I mean, I'm not a flamingo biologist, but I'm sure. I've got a feeling it'll be something to do with. That's interesting that they're also quite a salty lake. That I don't know if flamingos are quite
I know.
attracted to these
Apparently, because of the pinkiness that makes the flamingos pink. It's what and it causes that.
Okay.
Sorry, completely off topic there. Sorry.
That's right.
So if there's no sort of major crustaceans and stuff hanging around, does that mean they're predominantly picking off like little algae and that kind of stuff as their main food source?
Yeah, generally it's kind of biofilms, maybe some small aquatic insects, but yeah, generally biofilms of some kind. But they're so kind of nutrient starved in the wild that as soon as you get them in captivity, feeding them kind of anything off the shelf fish foods, they grow so much bigger.
Yeah.
Because I think they're just so nutrient starved in the wild that they can only get so big. And the low nutrient diet can only sustain such a sized fish. So yeah, get them in the lab, they're like they get like twice the size that they do in the wild, which is really quite interesting. And supposedly that happens with some of the Malawi species as well, depending on what it is that Malawi species' diet is. But again, I don't know too much about that. I've just been told that by my supervisor, who's obsessed with cichlids.
You said that the salinity level is pretty high. Are we talking like full salt levels, or in the brackish realms? Or where's that kind of sit?
So I believe it's a completely different kind of salt to marine salt. Not 100% sure. I'm not a chemist, but we've got a water sample taken from the lake, and I think they took it to some of the guys down in one of the chemistry labs at the uni, and they had to dilute it by 100 times before they could get any proper readings out of it. And this bottle of water that basically just lives in the freezer to preserve it, it doesn't freeze properly because of the amount of dissolved stuff that's in it.
Wow.
The salt content is ridiculous, and I remember the technicians telling me that if they essentially tried to replicate it fully, it would just tear through the pumps and stuff. It wouldn't, equipment just wouldn't last. So they do their best to replicate it as in as safe a way as possible, and they seem to do well. So yeah, very salty.
Wow, this is fascinating. Like I said, we don't have. I'm 99% sure we don't have these fish here in New Zealand. So like, all of this is just blowing my mind learning about totally new organism that I've never really spent any time. Like, if we don't get it here, I tend to not pay too much attention to it because there's not a lot of point in doing so. So, wow.
So you pretty much don't get them anywhere. There's Alcalapia alcalica is sometimes dotted about, and there's a few people, especially there's like maybe a handful of people in the UK that have them, something like that. I've heard of, there's apparently a few people in Spain as well, but like Undulilani and Latilabris and Grahami, it's maybe a handful of people in the world have them. It's you just don't see them,
right?
Actually, because it'd be almost impossible for a hobbyist to truly replicate their conditions.
So it's not that New Zealand's missing out; it's everybody's missing out, but for real logical reasons.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. Yeah, cool. We've had a question from Rebecca.
Okay.
She has said, "What do you feed your fishes in the lab? Do you think it would be more natural to feed them something lower in accessible nutrients?"
I've probably got to be quite careful what I say now, but I would personally probably go towards the natural replication route of something lower nutrient, but there's lots of stuff with lab protocol, and so fish have to be fed every day, and there's some standardized foods and stuff, but yeah, I definitely think if kind of a hobbyist was keeping them, it would be kind of, definitely it would be probably with quite how nutrient dense some of the food is in captivity. Not saying that the food we've got in captivity is perfect, but it's a lot more nutrient dense than what they've got in the wild. So I from a hobbyist, would probably be like probably not a lot of food just in general. But then equally, there is the argument that them growing bigger in captivity is a sign of them doing better. And the habitat that they're in the wild is so harsh that it's actually not good for them. It's an interesting argument saying that actually we're giving them better than what they get in the wild. So they're thriving and getting huge and living way longer and reproducing for longer. But it's interesting little debate.
Would you be classed as a saltwater fish or a freshwater fish?
I believe they're classed as a freshwater fish.
The salinity level of the lake, the salinity level ranks higher than the actual ocean itself, which is bizarre.
I think, not 100% sure, I think it is different salts. So I don't think it would be considered marine.
Okay.
Cool.
But don't quote me on that though.
Totally going to quote you on that. I'm going to cut that little snippet out and I'm going to put it all over the internet. My last question on these is, how do they spawn? Like, am I thinking mouth brooding like riff lake cichlids, or am I thinking nest building? How's that process go for them?
So the males will dig a bower, a sand pit, so to speak. Different males seem to have slightly different preferences as to how elaborate their sand pit is. Some males I've seen make a little divot in the middle and then make a much wider divot around that. Others I've just seen make a huge pit, essentially. It seems to be just male to male preference. I've even seen one male dig 3 or 4 different pits and try and jump between them, claiming them all. I've even seen some males watch another male dig a pit and then go and take that pit from them. So it's the males will dig a bower and then essentially try and get a female to come to the bower, and he'll do that by he will kind of swim at them directly, and then he will twist onto one side and just start kind of shimmying, and essentially trying to just corral them into the bower, where then it's they're mouth breeders. So it's kind of a mix of nest building and mouth breeding. So it's once he's corralled her into the nest, it's she lays the eggs, he fertilizes, and then she picks them up. So it is a maternal mouth breeder. And I think it's hold them in the mouth for just over 2 weeks. But then they don't appear to be, they don't appear to be quite as, some mouth breeders will kind of carry them around even quite late stage and spit them out and pull them around and put them back in. These seem to be very much more, once they've finished the yolk sac, gone, couldn't care less. Which is a bit of
14 days. I haven't dealt with mouth breeders for a long time, but I always thought most of that period was around about 21 days for reflake cichlids.
It could also be slightly different for these just because of the super high temperatures generally. So that'll lead to faster development rates, and these are because of in the wild the low nutrient diet essentially in such harsh conditions. They've got a very, very fast turnover. They can be reproductively active within like several weeks or something. They're basically made for rapid speciation because of these high temperatures and everything going on. They're basically just trying to crank out generation after generation as fast as possible. So it's possible that with it being about just over 2 weeks or so that the fry develop, that I'm guessing that'll be down to kind of higher temperatures and kind of quicker metabolisms. That kind of thing.
That would make sense. Cool. All right. I've found that really fascinating, and I can assure you that once we're done with this, I'm going to spend at least a good chunk of my day Googling and researching and reading about these.
I can maybe give you some access to some of the papers with the proper information in it. If you've
that'd be cool. That'd be real cool.
I've got a folder with pretty much all of the papers about Archelapias on them because I've had to cite most of them.
Please, that'd be great if you could send them over.
Just some of the kind of there's a brilliant one that this guy did a few years ago for his I think it might have been for his PhD. He basically has this massive, it's like a 60-page document basically just detailing so much about them and all the behaviors and so it's a really good cheat sheet. But yeah, I can try and message me later and I'll kind of I'll see what I can find. It's been a while since I've had all up, but I'll see what I can get hold of.
I will absolutely do that. Right, let's get back on the topic for at least what we've based our questions on, which is Amazonian fish. So you're not studying Amazonian fish at all? Is this your own personal?
Ironically, no. I dedicated my hobby side of things to Amazonian stuff, and then got to uni and African cichlids. So I did go to Peru over Easter, and that was that was with Ian Fuller's group. That was so the kind of the sampling stuff you see on my Instagram page was from that trip. So I can see how you've taken that as, because everything on my kind of social media is just all, apart from I think one picture of the Chinoides, everything else is all kind of Amazonian species.
Certainly is. We're just going to have to change some words in our questions, or just make them fit and make them work. Cool. Okay. So what got you interested in Amazonian fish? Where and why? And other than they're cool and they're so diverse, let's sort of start from there.
So they're cool, but I think it was generally just the diversity, because I mean I can't remember the stat exactly, but it's just over 50%. I think it's like 51% of all fish, or of all described fish species. Was it described? Was it just all fish? I feel like Rebecca knows the stat. If she can put that in the chat somewhere. But it's just over 50% of all fish diversity is in freshwater, which is in something like 2%, maybe less of that's actually accessible to the fish, which is kind of, it's just the diversity is ridiculous. And then the Amazon, kind of the South American system, is where, of the freshwater systems, the diversity is the highest. Other than, I mean, if you're just going for just localized area, I guess you'd be looking at Lake Malawi, over 800 cichlid species plus others. But generally, your South American river systems is where you've got the highest diversity. And I think that's just what made me kind of fall in love with it initially. And yeah, just because then it was, I think, because the first fish I ever bred was just a calico bristlenose, which was then my introduction to loricarids. And then I've kind of gone down that rabbit hole. And kind of loricarid diversity is amazing. Having kind of the amount of different species that can occur sympatrically, just with slightly different kind of dentitions, meaning they're specializing in slightly different foods, allowing them to coexist with still essentially the same feeding mechanism of a sucker mouth, is absolutely fascinating. And yeah, so I've gone down the rabbit hole of loricarids, and then later on from that, from breeding honeycomb driftwood catfish during Linus Perugier, I then fell in love with orconipterids, which are woodcats, if for those that don't know that long word. And yeah, so within South America, I've generally ended up focusing on loricarids and orconipterids, seeing if I can breed species here and there and stuff. And then I kind of, as I became more obsessed with kind of habitat replication and biotopy type stuff, it's then, okay, what lives with those loricarids in the wild that won't outcompete them, that I can have side by side and all get along nice and dandy. So then, yeah, from that, then looking at other species that live with them and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's roughly say on topic, I think.
Cool. Okay, so you basically put your hobby side of it into loricarids and woodcats for the best part, yeah? Yeah, cool. Okay. All right. We can work with that. I'm also naturally assuming that a lot of what you're doing in your own home aquarium is trying to replicate and mimic best as possible, purely from sort of what you do from a study point of view. Like, you're not just kind of throwing them all in there, but you're species onlying them and really studying and paying attention to all that kind of stuff.
So that's kind of, I'm going to say that's what I want to do.
Oh.
I've kind of dug myself into a hole with, is I built up quite a nice collection of fancy aquatic plants from all over the world. Before I realized that I wanted to kind of do more biotopy style stuff. And now I'm very limited by, I don't want to get rid of the plants, but I've only got a very limited number of tanks. Now, the long-term plan is to kind of split things up. most of that will have to wait until I've finished uni, got into kind of a more stable place, where I know I'm going to be for a few years, and then I can set up a few extra tanks and really make sure that I've kind of gone more the biotope style route. I've been trying to separate so some things are in species tanks, some things are in kind of, it's making sure that everything that I'm putting with each other won't outcompete each other, will kind of get along within the confines of, I've got 9 tanks running at the moment, which for some people sounds like a lot, for other people doesn't sound like a lot at all. Yeah, I really want to, as soon as I get a chance, I really want to go all in on, going as biotopy as possible to get a better chance of, essentially replicating the habitat as well as I can, so that I can then witness those behaviors and kind of witness as naturalistic of behaviors as possible. Because there's some behaviors that you wouldn't necessarily think about, like certain something like checkerboard cichlids. They will quite happily kind of pick up bits of leaves and stuff and check under them for stuff, and you wouldn't see that normally. And kind of, I've got a lot of love for kind of a cluttered substrate. Most people just seem to go like bare sand bed or something like that. I quite like having a mix of some seed pods here or there, some leaves, and then what I don't see enough of from people is just sticks, twigs, different sizes. People seem to limit botanicals to seed pods and leaves, and just forget about sticks. And one thing I've noticed in Peru, especially, a lot of the time, you put the net on the floor, drag it up, it's half of it's full of leaves. Loads of these kind of like sand-dwelling whiptail species, they're all sitting amongst a load of leaves, and then, or loads of twigs, that kind of stuff. And then when I'm feeding some of my woodcats and stuff, if you've got lots of clutter, it makes feeding time more enriching, because it's not just the food's on top of the sand. They're having to kind of snuffle between everything, cover things, push twigs out of the way to get to stuff, and it just creates a much more interactive environment that is better for them mentally, because it's stimulating them, creating a more interactive kind of actual three-dimensional environment for them to be a part of. Because, and this is going to sound a bit philosophical and fancy, but ultimately we've put them in a glass box. It's our kind of duty to enrich their lives as much as possible in that glass box. So if you've just got bare sand and a piece of wood, there's only so much that fish can do. Whereas if you've got tons of clutter, tons of stuff going on, whilst creating all of the niches that fish might potentially want to utilize, either in the wild or in your tank, you'll get to see a lot more going on. And one thing that you definitely, I think people overlook a lot, is stereotyping behaviors. Are you aware of what that is? Or
I'm aware of what a stereotype is, but not when it comes to, I guess you can kind of make the logic when it comes to fish, but yeah, continue with what you're
so stereotyping behaviors are, you see it most of the time in stuff like big cats at the zoo. they've kind of, you can see where that big cat has been pacing. It's got a track paced into the floor. Or there's some quite famous videos of like polar bears basically standing still, just kind of waving their head in a certain pattern. And it's when their habitat isn't enriched enough, whether that's through tank size, or well, whether that's through enclosure size or stuff filling tanks, to pass the time and to keep their brains occupied, they start undertaking these kind of these stereotyping behaviors where they're kind of doing the same pattern over and over again. You see it in some people's dogs. If they don't get out for a walk enough, they'll like lay a track around the garden or something. And people don't realize that that happens in fish as well. So one issue I've been having a little bit with my Tatia orcas, which are up in that, above the tank that looks like it's the sun, right up there, is one or two individuals, no, just one individual in there has been showing this stereotyping behavior. I believe that's because with Tatia orca, there's a bit of variation with woodcats. Some of them are just quite sedentary, don't move a lot. Others are almost just straight pelagic. As soon as they come out of hiding, they are just swimming non-stop. And so put that in the confines of walls, and they start having to find certain swim routes to be able to fulfill that need to move.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where you see things like glass surfing. Now, glass surfing occasionally, that's fine. Glass surfing in any fish where you start to see the same repeating pattern over and over again. Now, it might not be doing it all the time, but it's like maybe each evening you'll just notice, hang on, that fish has done kind of that same loop. And it's just done it 4 times in a row. Oh, then it's been distracted by food, but then it's gone back and done that loop a few more times. And certain species seem to be more prone to it than others. I know it's a big one in stuff like Amazon puffers. And well, pufferfish in general seem to be quite prone to it. There's lots of videos of pufferfish in public aquariums going up and down the same piece of wall. And the other thing, the other kind of heartbreaking thing about it is once a stereotypy behavior is ingrained, even if the habitat changes completely, the animal might still carry on exhibiting that behavior. There's been instances of tigers that were kept in captivity that were exhibiting stereotyping behaviors in captivity that were then released back into the wild. And even though they're in the wild, no walls, because that stereotyping behavior was so ingrained, they still had their daily track, where even though they've been put in this new location in the wild, in their territory, they've still created this daily track.
Mm-hmm.
And so glass surfing is definitely, I'm going to say, the fish equivalent, if it's the same repetitive pattern. And I've noticed it with one of my orcas. And unfortunately, even though I have changed things quite a lot, bigger tank, different layouts, that one orca, for whatever reason, is still showing that kind of, it'll do a couple loops in the top left corner of the tank, and then do a lap of the tank, come back, do another loop of that corner of the tank. And I've just realized quite how far off topic I've gotten. I can't.
No. Stay on this. This is incredibly fascinating. I totally thought what you were talking about earlier was a completely different thing, and you're blowing my mind, and I'm enjoying this. Please continue on as much as you want.
So yeah, stereotyping behaviors and making sure that you are essentially enriching the animals in your care's lives enough is way more important than people realize, because it can have lasting psychological damage on the animals that you're caring for. Now, the difficulty is some species are more prone to it than others, and it's potentially something that even when they were kept in the fish shop, if they were kept there for long enough in quite a bare tank, certain animals might have kind of picked it up then, and then they're stuck with that for the rest of their life. And I mean, the orcas, I that one orca, I've got no idea at what point it picked that up. It might have been when I had it in a slightly smaller tank in quarantine, because I ended up quarantining for a bit longer than I was intending on, because I was having to move between kind of home and uni and stuff. But yeah, I've done as much as I can to try and fix that, and none of the others have exhibited it. It's just this one individual. But yeah, it's another fascinating topic that does not get touched on. I just don't see it.
Cool. So I've got a gazillion questions for you right now.
Okay.
Cool. Right. First of all, we'll just run through some of the one or two of the comments we've had.
Cool.
Rebecca has said that glass surfing, she thinks, sometimes is stereotypic and can be caused just by stress, which kind of makes sense. I'm thinking just recently I've moved a whole bunch of my cories from one tank to one together, and I'm seeing a lot of them doing that, and I'm wondering if that is just a stress behavior and then they'll kind of calm down after a week or so. Hopefully.
I mean, short-term glass surfing as a response to stress definitely makes sense. It's an invisible barrier at the side of the tank, well, at the edge of their usable space. They're going to be, especially in a stress state, they often just want to swim, try find somewhere that's safe. And so they'll be testing the limits of their environment, see what's available. So yeah, short-term glass surfing as a stress response, I can definitely see how that's kind of quite likely, actually, with most fish. But then it's whether that becomes long-term and they develop almost a routine with it. That's when you're starting to look at it maybe being an issue. And your best bet is to then completely, well, to either try and diagnose why, just whether there's not enough going on in the habitat, if it's not big enough, if it's just trying to figure that out.
So for me, with that situation, they're temporary in a tank, but they were going to permanently be in a tank of a similar size. Trying to downsize, compress a whole bunch of tanks into one, but it's already made me question maybe that is not the right option. Especially if they don't calm down after another week or so, then that might not be the right option. Amount of fish, size available to them, etc., etc. So you've definitely made me rethink what I thought was probably going to be an acceptable solution might actually not be an acceptable solution. So I'm personally glad we're having this conversation right now.
I mean, with cories, it is it's interesting because glass surfing in cories can sometimes be looking at suitable spawning sites. Some cories spawn on glass. Sometimes that's just kind of observed, like them just testing their environment. Oh, this could be a nice kind of, this might be a nice.
Have we lost him, or have I lost him?
No, I think he's went quiet. He's frozen now. So
He is. Cool. Yeah. We can pretend we know what we're talking about when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, talking about repetitive behaviours. I remember I had a rope fish, the ones with the orange bellies, and
Oh, yeah.
they come out and it's set at the front of the tank and just wait for something to come along.
Cool.
I think I'm back.
Yep, you're back. We're good.
Okay, cool. Yeah, with Rob McClaw's episode a few weeks back, fascinating. Especially hearing about kind of corries being more likely to spawn in smaller tanks. Basically just increased interaction with each other as a potential theory behind that. And I've definitely seen. I don't think I've seen. Granted, I've not personally worked with that many Corydoradae, but I've seen plenty of corries in kind of smaller tanks that haven't been displaying stereotypy. I've not personally seen stereotyping corries before, but I don't have the experience with it enough to say. But with yours, I'm going to say likelihood is it was, unless that they are showing, because I feel like stereotyping probably is quite rare, but it's being able to recognize when it has happened, and it's not just glass surfing one off. It's almost like clockwork. That fish is doing that loop again. So chances are you're probably fine.
Yeah,
but it's rare instances when there's a bit more going on.
So Renee has asked, is glass surfing a cause for concern?
I mean, similar like we've been touching on. If it's just a one-off, if it's always different, probably not. It could just be them exploring their environment or testing the limits of their environment. But if it is, like I was saying, if it is habitual, almost the same every time, then you're starting to think something neurological is going on. Something has become so ingrained that fish just feels like it has to do that all the time.
She's got a follow-up question. I've heard glass surfing mentioned quite a bit on social media, but there's no literature that they can find on that topic. Do you know of any literature on that
It's very sparse. Stereotypy and zoochosis is studied a lot in, I'm going to say, the obvious animals, like big cats, ursids, so bears, and some of these kind of bigger animals that show way more obvious symptoms and seem to be like almost every case of them in captivity seems to show it to some extent. It's way more studied than that. Annoyingly, you really don't see a lot of literature at all on the fish side, because most of the money in the fish world is in aquaculture. And unless it has something to do with food fish, you're not going to get a lot of funding. So I've done searches for it before. I've just not managed to find a lot. But I really wish that there was, so that we know more about it. But at the moment, it's very much like what we're observing fits the standard definitions for stereotypy. There's just not been much actual study gone into it.
So Brandon, aka has said, my coolies do this loop from the bottom to the top on the side of my big tank every night for quite some time. Two of them do it in tandem. Would it be a common thing for two to do that, or is it more of an individual thing?
I'm not sure. With social animals that do follow each other and mimic each other's behaviors, sometimes it's a possibility. I have seen like one of my orcas following the stereotypy orca before, and I got quite concerned because I thought two of them were doing it, but then that one stop. So I don't know if there's some kind of mimicry aspect with more social animals. But from the sounds of it, if it's like almost every night they're doing that same loop, that does sound like it's starting to get towards kind of a potential stereotyping kind of behavior.
Cool. So back to where my brain is ticking over with, we've talked, you've mentioned enrichment, trying to break this sort of thing. I went straight to big fish like arowana, for example, when they just, because all they can do basically is loops of aquariums.
Yeah.
Because they have no other option.
Yeah.
Do you then think it is ethical to keep big ass fish that get way too big in aquariums? Because I would personally think that arowana should not be in aquariums, because realistically, personally, most people can't house them, I don't believe, properly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I pretty much agree with that. It's most of these big fish are not being provided with enough. So many people, I've seen the excuse quite a few times of, oh, you have to keep it in the bear tank because otherwise it injures itself on the decoration and stuff. And I've seen that kind of excuse and reasoning used quite a few times, and it's kind of baffles me because they're only injuring themselves on it because it's such a small environment realistically for the size of the fish that it is. And when you look at something like an arowana especially, that is a fish that has a specialized morphology specifically designed to jump out of the water to catch things either on branches or in midair. Its whole physiology is built around being able to coil up into a net and launch itself out of the water. And, well, the added thing with fish jumping, this is just a bit of a side tangent, fish jumping can be used as a cognition measurement. So fish like a hatchet fish, there's a couple of little marbled hatchets in there, they use jumping as a predator evasion strategy.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot of thought that goes into that jump. It is just, oh shit, there's something there, bang, and they just launch themselves out of the water. They don't think about it more than just getting out there. Whereas something that jumps for predation tactic, there's a lot more thought that goes into that, because they've got to A, know where the prey is, B, take into account the refraction of the water, C, then figure out the distance they need to travel so they don't put in too much or too little and miss completely. So it can be used as a bit of a cognition measure, as generally the more intelligent fish species are those that are jumping predators. Archerfish taking that one up with then having to control jets of water and whatnot, as well as jumping. So something like an arowana, all of those people that say, oh, just put a kind of a brick on the lid so it can't jump out, and then, oh look, it's jumped, hit the lid and broken its spine or suffered head trauma because it's done the thing that it's biologically designed to do. You've just got so much kind of such a misunderstanding of that animal that you're trying to deny it the one thing, like the main thing that it's designed to do. So yeah, I very much agree with you that like arowanas, that they should not be kept in the general way that most people keep them. I think the only ethical way of doing it would be, well, A, I'm going to say a tank got to be at least like 20 times the length of the fish in length, and maybe 10 times in width. Something like that. And then having the facilities around that to allow for jumping. So whether that's like kind of some kind of a bit of a crude comparison, but almost like a suicide net, like something around so that if it does jump and go out the side, it's not going to fall on the floor. It needs a safe way of jumping so that it always ends up back in the tank. And it needs big enough space outside of the tank so that it can jump to its full extent, and needs to be fed appropriately as well so that it exercises those muscles, kind of, and showing the behaviors, well, back to natural behaviors again, showing these naturalist behaviors that it's meant to. And there's so many people that just seem to want to shove a big fish in a big-ish tank because it looks cool, and there's no thought gone into its behaviors and what that fish is designed to do, essentially.
About 18 months or so ago, I went up to Auckland here in New Zealand. I went up to the Auckland Zoo. They just completed an Asian biotope type setup, which was phenomenally cool. If you're in New Zealand and you haven't been to the Auckland Zoo, do it. It's worth it. Anyhow, they had a group of Asian arowanas there, like a big, massive display, clear perspex glass front, ridiculously deep, ridiculously big, and I think from memory they had some sort of a net on it. I originally thought it was so people couldn't reach over, grab them and run away with them because obviously they're quite valuable, but it's probably more the jumping aspect now we've been talking about it.
Yeah.
At the very moment as I was looking at the display, and I was there for a very long time because it was fantastic, I thought to myself, these fish should not be held in captivity in glass boxes the way that we do. Just watching their behavior, because I just recently seen one in a glass box at someone's house, to then seeing them in this huge enclosure, it just opened my mind of we should not be having these. Like, as cool as they are, it's just not right for the best case.
Yeah, if someone wants to view that kind of, I mean, most people aren't getting it for the behavior realistically, but if someone does want to view that kind of behavior, there's so many kind of smaller options. Even just look at pantodons, the African butterfly.
Yeah, cool fish.
Realistically, very similar very similar morphology, even bigger wings, so to speak. But they do that. There's brilliant example is Aplochilus, the golden wonder killifish, and their variant as well, which most people don't realize that the golden one isn't the natural one. It's weirdly hard to get hold of the natural one. So they have essentially a third eye on top of their head, which is like this motion sensor that means that they can be facing kind of if they're facing that way, there is an insect on a branch up here that then falls into the water. This third eye then detects the ripples that's produced and basically tells that fish where it is. And within a split second, that of that little tiny insect landing on the water, the golden wonder killifish is there. They've kind of know exactly where they are. And they're another one which jumps. They will figure out where their prey is, jump, knock it off the branch, and then using that ripple, figure out where it has landed, if they didn't get it in their mouth first try, to then catch it. And there's quite a lot of different species which do show these kinds of behaviors, so you can definitely do it on a smaller scale than an arowana, that's for sure. I haven't read it anywhere online, but I recently picked up a book from like 1980. I think it was an Axelrod book, and that had a report of Hugetta gars, the Tenoculus Hugetta, these little South American characins. I say little, like 25 centimeters. They report them jumping to catch flying insects.
Huh.
The amount of kind of brain power that must go into that, of figuring out that, is amazing. But I've never read anything about that online. It's just in this book from the 80s.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I've also forgotten where I started with that.
That's cool, because I've got question after question after question from my original question anyway, so we're good. So again with the enrichment side of it, and we can talk about arowana because of the size, and this is probably a logical side of it. And trying not to get into these, like, I've forgotten what you said, the stereotypical type behavior things.
Yeah, stereotyping behaviors, yeah.
Stereotyping, yeah. So live foods, for me, I've always kind of worked on the theory, if the fish doesn't necessarily need live feeder fish, then we shouldn't be giving them live feeder fish. When I say need, there is absolutely some fish that will not take anything but live fish, and I get it.
Yeah.
But there's some that can be pellet trained.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any correlation from not feeding them live fish to fish that require that, and that kind of behaviors that work with it? And where's your standpoint and viewpoint on that kind of scenario and live foods and stuff? That was quite a long-winded question.
I mean, live foods, when it comes to invertebrates, generally, like you brine shrimp, Daphnia, whatnot, that's brilliant enrichment.
Yep.
When you get to something like you mentioned that is like an obligate piscivore, that's when you get some of these there's some slight ethical dilemmas behind it, obviously. In the UK, it's a bit of a legal grey area with whether it is or is not legal to feed live vertebrates in the form of fish to other fish. I know that there are definitely people that like breed out something stupidly to breed like duckies or convicts, and then use the fry to like feed to something like a South American leaf fish or something like that. It's definitely an interesting ethical dilemma, debate, that kind of thing. I haven't personally kept anything that is an obligate piscivore. So that's definitely an interesting one. There's also then, is it Blanophagus? There's also some obligate scale eaters as well, which I've seen people loophole around by buying essentially like a side of salmon from the fishmongers. So they've got, it's basically a sheet of scales. So that's an interesting Lepidophagus, Rebecca's put it. And yeah, that's an interesting kind of loophole around that I've seen. Because there's definitely, how do I word this? Sometimes it's impossible to have the true nature thing in your what they would exhibit in the wild in the habitat that you've created. So sometimes you have to make substitutions, whether that's something like instead of roots from a tree coming in or roots from some kind of riparian vegetation, then you've got some, whether that's just a floating spawning mop as a kind of a substitute. So like the woodcats, a lot of the time in the wild, at least this is how Ian Fuller taught me how to catch them, is you look for these bits of tree that are, or these bits that have a branch or whatever that have gone into the water, and there's like a root ball just at the surface of the water. Essentially, you just put the net under that, and there's a decent chance there'll be a woodcat in it, depending on the time of year, population of the woodcats. So as an attempted simulation of that, I've been putting, at least for the tank that I had those guys in, the woodcats that I caught, I'd put in a spawning mop in the corner, and they would hide in it, which is quite cool. Or there was a lot of these, so in some very thick plants, like very thick kind of bundles of stem plants, there was all these little tiny knife fish. So as a replication, we'd put in a load of spawning mops, and they would essentially just live within those spawning mops. So there are sometimes ways which you can use unnatural elements as a substitute for the natural thing that you can't replicate. Even like, well, the obvious one is pleco caves. Nowhere in nature is there a little ceramic cave. Yeah, there's this entire industry built upon making ceramic caves for people to breed loricarids with. And obviously it depends on the species. Some do it in rock crevices, some do it in different rock formations, others dig essentially dig their own caves into muddy riverbanks. Others kind of whittle away a cave out of a piece of kind of quite soft wood. So, I mean, you can try and provide that in captivity. It's going to take them a hell of a long time to do it, and it's going to be an absolute mess in your tank, especially if you try and make some kind of mud bank for them to tear apart. But yeah, it's, and I guess with some of those obligate piscivores, to try and more ethically kind of keep them in captivity, it's if they will feed on shrimp or some kind of alternative, sure, go for it. As long as you're not just chucking it in and it's on the floor and they eat it, as long as you're doing it in some kind of stimulating way. Like I've seen ways where they basically like almost make them chase them with a set of tweezers or something. So or they'll have the this ambush predator there and ready, and they'll kind of try and make the food look like it's swimming past. So then the ambush predator can go, oh, I'll grab that. So yeah, I think that roughly.
My last kind of question on this line, probably not. Social fish, shoaling fish, schooling fish, that sort of scenario.
Yep.
Have you observed that sort of behavior when they're not kept in ample sized groups? I know the general rule of thumb is people say get 6 of them. I've always personally thought that's a marketing ploy to get people to buy more fish in the shop, and bigger numbers like 10 or 12 seem to work way better for most species of shoaling and schooling fish. Have you seen or been aware of any papers that have shown when they're kept in too smaller numbers that these fish exhibit those behaviours? Or alternatively, in bigger numbers if they exhibit that said behaviour?
So there was definitely a paper that I'm aware of that was, I think it was measuring essentially cortisol levels, stress levels in different group sizes. And generally, for a lot of these schooling species, when they are kept in like a more suitably sized group, generally they'll show lower cortisol levels, which is less stress, which is good. So obviously it depends on the schooling fish. Some schooling fish are only found in like groups of 5 or 6 in the wild. Others are found in thousands, and in which case it's basically just as many as you can. 6 is quite a, I'm going to kind of agree with you there. It seems to be that's what shops have chosen as the minimum. There's some shops push that down to 5. It's I think, but you'll see a much wider array of behaviors given a larger group. In the larger group, it gives them in a larger group in a larger tank, it gives them the option of, if they want to only go around in a group of 5 that day, 5 of them can split off and do that. There's also interesting concepts about shoals as opposed to schools, with shoals being just in the general vicinity of each other, meaning that yes, the group of fish, each fish will be individually doing their own thing, and yes, each fish might, yes, it might be like a tiny pencil fish or something, and they're like this far apart, they're still in the same shoal. They're still aware of each other's presence. And as long as there's a few of them in that general vicinity, that's still technically a shoal. So even if your 2 cardinal tetras might be on opposite sides of your 2-foot tank, they're still within each other's shoal. People seem to think if they're not next to each other doing exactly the same thing at exactly the same time, then they're not showing proper group behavior. But they won't be doing that all the time. That's can be a predator response. They can still be together as a shoal, foraging, doing their own thing within the general vicinity of each other. Yeah, I think that. Yep. Again, I keep going off track a little bit, but
that's okay.
It's absolutely fine. I'm absolutely geeking out over this last about 45 minutes or so. You've definitely opened up my mind and my thinking, and am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? Type of vibes and all that kind of stuff. And it's absolutely, it's been incredibly fascinating for sure. Yeah, John, if you have a question, please ask it, because I just need to breathe and get myself back to where I need to be again.
Just a general question I was going to get. It's something that when people use the reference school or shoal, how would you define the difference between the two of them?
So off the top of my head, generally, like I was saying, shoal is in kind of the general, within the general vicinity of each other. They're still a group, but in the general vicinity of each other, mostly doing their own thing, foraging, whatever. Usually just going off kind of group vigilance of one of us will see the predator, and then they'll alert the rest, and then you get some slightly different behaviors. Whereas a school is generally, I believe, generally quite a lot tighter, doing similar things at similar times. You'll see that a lot more in some of these big pelagic marine species, where it's like a billion sardines in a ball. You don't see it as much with some of the freshwater ones. You'd probably see it a lot more in the wild, but especially in captivity, you don't see active schooling quite as much, unless you've got. I mean, you occasionally get to see pictures on videos on Instagram or something of someone's, I don't know, 1,000-liter Tetra tank with 300 rummy noses in it. Then they start to show some of these more interesting, larger collective behaviors. And I think Moncasia costae, the black line tetra, they seem to exhibit it quite a lot more as well, especially in larger groups. But again, it seems to be more of a stress response, group sizey. There's a lot of different things going into it, and I don't know how many fish would fall into the strict category of school or shoal. I think generally most are shoal, sometimes leaning towards school, depending on what's going on. But
you see, if like Oliver Knott has done a few videos over the years where he's standing in front of the big aquarium and he's waving his arms, and all the fish are following him. But I wouldn't say that's not so much schooling. That's just more that all those fish are looking for food at the same time. But
Yeah,
you don't see natural schooling that often in freshwater aquariums.
yeah. Again, I don't know if it's just that the conditions to create, like the conditions that would cause them to do that just aren't present very often, or group sizes aren't. I mean, you see it a lot more if you like shove it, like just drop a bucket full of tetras into a new tank, and they were to all just together shoot to one side of the tank. That's when you're more likely to see that kind of more stereotypical schooling behavior is more of a stress response as a, oh crap, this is new, or if you just spent ages moving a massive piece of wood in the tank or something and they're going so yeah, I think that's
Yeah, that does make sense.
You mentioned checkerboard cichlids earlier. They are definitely one that's fascinated me recently. I'm sorry, Helen, that it didn't work out with us when it comes to them. What can you tell us about them and their behaviours? And if I was hypothetically wanting to set up a bit of a biotope style aquarium for a group, what would I do?
So I mean, I've only got personal experience with Crossus filamentosus, which is the much more common one. Eventually, on my list, I would love to breed all of the different species of checkerboards. Very hard to get hold of most of them, and equally hard to sometimes keep alive. Lots of people have issues with that kind of thing. But I know that there's people don't realize quite how much they necessarily interact with their environment foraging wise. So like I mentioned earlier, checkerboards will just pick up leaves, move them out of the way, flip them over, see what's on the underside of it, if there's any food, that kind of thing. And filamentosus, I think it was Gerald Buswell was telling me that they do generally spawn on slightly curled leaves. So lots of leaf litter, for example, for them would be good. Mine once spawned in a little tiny ceramic tube, but I believe that's because at the time I didn't have any leaves in the tank. So that was just the most suitable unnatural alternative that they could find that fulfilled that kind of rough shape that they needed, and they went for it. I've also had a bit of an issue with my checkerboards recently in that I keep ending up with males. So I've bought many a pair over the years, well, over the past couple of years, and keep ending up with males. And the most recent of which was what I thought I had 2 males, 1 female left. Turns out that female was actually just a male posing as a female for over a year and a half before it showed any male trait whatsoever.
Wow.
And it does seem to be that the only kind of guaranteed way is if when you see them at the shop. The curious thing about filamentosus, can't remember whether this is with all of the checkerboards, but with filamentosus definitely, once a female has spawned, her pelvic fins go red. Is it pelvic? I think it's pelvic. Her pelvic fins go orangey red and stay that colour forever. But only once they've spawned. So I thought this was just a female, because I got it when it was quite young. I thought it was just a female that had never spawned. But no, it was a sleeper male the entire time. Which, given that it grew up around like 3 other males, that's kind of understandable. But the other one that was a sleeper male It showed itself as a male after like 2 months. So this one to stay for over a year and a half before, because it stayed smaller in size, it's everything. And then suddenly, when I was kind of moved back to uni in September, and I've kind of had to move it between a couple of tanks. I moved it and then put it in the tank, and it had been quite a dark tank, so I hadn't seen it much. And then suddenly, there was a slight lyra tail. But so yeah, he's that little male has just blown my mind. That
So for the people watching, when you ask your fish shop if they can get you a male and a female, my response is generally, I will try my hardest, but I can't guarantee it. That is exactly why. You can have absolutely educated guesses and go, I think I'm 99% sure, but at least you've seen spawns, had confirmed spawns. It is just often a we should be right, but not 100% sure side of things. So, yeah.
Because especially with something like that, I'd almost be inclined to, next time I get them, I'd almost be inclined to just ask for females. Some of them will end up being males.
Yeah.
Especially if they're quite young. Gives you a better shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you were to try and mimic a bio as much as possible, what other fish would you be wanting to keep with them? What sort of setup would you run with them? How would you sort of make that ecosystem work?
That would, depend on, the type of checkerboard and whether, and kind of what the focus is. So if this is to breed checkerboards, then it would be very different as to if I was putting them in as part of a wider community. I say wider community, still biotope style, because there's some, I believe it was Even McColgy in his Orinoco book. There are some brilliant accounts of kind of some, not symbiotic, there's another word for when it realistically only benefits one of them. But
I don't even. I can't remember the word either.
And so some of these larger sand sifting cichlids, like not Geophagus, they will be it, but Satanoperca demon were the specifically mentioned. They will have a couple of different species following them around, basically, because when they pick up a mouthful of substrate, filter it through their gills, they have a couple of different species following them around, picking up then the stuff that they've uncovered, because they're smaller and they can fit into those little gaps within the leaves or twigs or whatever, and B, the actual stuff that's been filtered through the gills, they'll then go at that as well and sift through it. So they'll be basically following these slightly larger Satanopercas around. And I think, off the top of my head, Filamentaris was one of those species. And there was another one, I think it was like Microcema bricon, Cassiquare or something like that. Basically, this tiny little kind of tetra, same kind of color as my arm, with, I think he'd nicknamed it the Cory tetra because it was swimming essentially like a cory, basically mistaking it for a baby cory at that point, because they were following these around, swimming on a slight angle like cories would, sniffling at the substrate, following Satanopercas around. And that kind of thing. You're never going to see it in the hobby because a collector's going to look at that and go, oh, people are going to want them, because collectors seem to think people only care about colour. Well, to be fair, most aquarists do seem to only care about colour. Not as many look at the little nitty-gritty behaviours, but like, I would love to set up a tank with that kind of thing to see if they do kind of just follow them around. Although in an aquarium setting, I'd be a bit concerned about larger Sitanopercas having a go at eating smaller, like female checkerboards, or if I could get hold of any of those little coin tetras. But if it was more just for checkerboards, well, I'd look at what species are found sympatrically with them, so which species are found in the same river systems with them, and they either go with the exact species, or if there is another species in the same genus that will realistically have quite similar behavior, then that fish is more likely to know what to do to kind of interact with their natural tank mates, so to speak, wild mates, whatever. And so something like a Nanostomus might be perfect, or one of the smaller hatchetfish species, because they're not going to compete. They shouldn't cause each other issue when breeding, and with a smaller hatchet or smaller, actually I'm going to change that to a smaller and peaceful pencil, because some of the pencils are surprisingly aggressive. I.e. the male coral red I've got in there will happily chase some of the hatchets and whatnot. And yeah, so one of the more peaceful pencils, possibly one of the more peaceful hatchets. Something like I think dream trio for me would probably be, well, big group of Carnegella strigata marbled hatchets, big group of Nanostomus equus diptail pencils, and then a big group of, well, I say a big group, I'm going to say a medium-sized group, like maybe 6, between 5 and 7 or so, maybe a little bit more, of the checkerboards, because weirdly, compared to other kind of dwarf cichlids, they do seem to quite like being in a kind of more of a group, and you see more of a hierarchy being developed than you would in something like an Epistogramma, where it's that's a male, we're going to beat the crap out of each other. These guys, they generally do develop more of a hierarchy, and it's quite a lot more interesting to observe kind of the little bickerings between them. I mean, they do then seem to be absolutely fine with little loricarids and stuff. So, like the fish that I'd chosen, I mean, it went off course. The fish that I originally chose for that tank was going to be a Rio Negro / Rio Domini tank, based around the L107 Ancestris, and then trying to build a community around that that's kind of biotope correct and functions well. Which is why I did start with, granted plans changed over the years, but I started with the group of L107 Ancestris, a group of checkerboard cichlids, Filamentosus, a group of Carnegella strigata, the marbled hatchets, and a big group of Nanostomus equus. Now, it did get thrown out of balance a bit when I got some Capella naturaris, which is this spotted splash tetra, not quite the same as, so same genus as Capella arnoldi, which are the famous ones for jumping out, spawning out of water, flopping back in. These are more of an intermediate species. They spawn on leaves that are just submerged. Now, whether that's a dead leaf that's started to sink but hasn't fully sunk, or whether it's a water lily leaf that's slightly underneath the water, they'll kind of shimmy on top of that leaf, spawn, the male will claim a leaf, and then he'll kind of coerce the female to get onto that leaf, and they'll lay the eggs, being protected from all of the fish below by having them on top of these kind of slightly submerged leaves. Turns out they are weirdly aggressive for characins, little tiny characins. Sorry. And when a male has claimed his leaf, or because I had my water lily substitute was a red tiger lotus. Yes, it's West African, but it still fulfills the same niche. I had them spawning on top of these lily leaves. It's amazing to watch. But anytime they do that, anytime the male would claim a territory, he'd just start kind of nipping the fins of the checkerboard cichlids, beating the crap out of little marbled hatchets and the really slow-moving, peaceful equus pencils. So there's a lot to learn from that, but equally, there's bugger all information about Natterai and their behavioural habits online. So it was only really from first-hand experience that I had to learn that. That and the whole deal with the Capella group is half the time they get imported as splash tetra, and it's look at the draw what you get, and then most people can't figure out what's what, even though there's quite a helpful key from about 2017. But loads of the old names get used, like Capella. These were imported as Capella Minekini, which was right until about 2017, and then it became a junior synonym of Capella Natterai. And most of what people think of Capella Natterai are actually another Capella, and it's all really confusing. But yeah, these Capella Natterais even then ended up. So whilst they were from the right region, were biotopically correct, that doesn't mean that they work. So these would. I like. I've got some beautiful little Rhinolocarias, the Chicariacangas, the little wood grain whiptails, and these would be like trying to peck at their eyes and stuff, and or like peck at the filaments on the fins. Like, I had no idea these Capella. I mean, as stunning as these Capellas are, and as cool as the behaviors are that they're exhibiting, they just didn't seem to be good. Kind of, even though I thought they would be really good, a really good fit for that kind of tank that I designed, because with it being a partially filled tank as well, so that I can see water lilies from the top, that kind of thing, so that I can see the marbled hatchets from the top. It's, yeah, it just didn't end up working. And they ended up whittling down the numbers of hatchets and pencils and stuff, so I had to take them out, put them in a different tank. Yeah.
So undoubtedly you've opened up my third eye, because we've been talking about three eyes, so I thought I'd just bring that one in.
Cool.
And I don't know if I like it, because you're making me now question all of my life decisions and everything that I'm doing moving forward, and you've just made my waters very muddy again. So thank you for that. Yeah. I don't know if I'm sitting quite happy after this or really happy. So it's been a very We'll see how we go with that.
Just whilst my brain's on it, so I'm going to say, a weird obsession with, as you've probably heard me mentioning, fish that interact with the riparian zone. And kind of, there's a lot more fish than people realize will interact with kind of plants, bugs, whatever, that are just above the water surface than people realize. Which is why I absolutely love this tank that I got custom made. That's got glass sliding doors at the top, so
that's cool.
My kind of plants and stuff growing out of the top have their root systems in the water, and be able to see them all, see all the fish from the top, and allow things to jump if they want to jump, like marbled hatchets, so they don't hit themselves on the ceiling and stuff. And I would love to do this style of tank with so many other things, like, like I'd love to do that kind of tank with like those golden wonder killifish, with kind of like the pantodons, the African butterfly fish, all those kinds of stuff. I'd love to do that kind of thing, because it just gives you because you don't often get to look in from the top as well.
Yeah.
Got like a rimless tank with no lid, in which case you won't be keeping stuff that stays right near the surface. So it provides that whole extra kind of viewpoint, and something like even the woodcats. People don't think about it because they're catfish, but a lot of woodcats are surface feeding.
Oh,
You get
really?
a whole different perspective on their feeding when you get to watch it from the top. Loads of these different woodcat species are borderline pelagic because they are coming up from the bottom, zooming about at the top, looking for these kind of surface dwelling insects and that kind of thing that are right on top of the water. And one thing I really want to try with them is feeding like fruit flies and whatnot.
yeah, that's what came into my head. Yeah.
And yeah, I would love to have. Well, I basically need to teach myself how to build tanks. I've not gotten around to that yet, but so that I can build loads of these, because this on a rack system, in my eyes, this is wasted space. Whereas this, there's like a few centimeters left at the top for light, and that's the only gap between that and the next layer. Because it means it's front access, there's no wasted space, you get to have plants at the top, you get to have the benefits of the root systems from the plants in the water, which is a niche that so many fish hide in that we just don't have a lot of the time in our tanks. It provides so much more surface cover, which again, when you look at some fish at night, if you've got a very bare tank and they're sleeping with like stress colours right at the surface in the corner of the tank, that fish would normally be sleeping where there's a load of roots or right by the riverbank.
Mm-hmm.
That's the riverbank is an entire niche that we just don't have in the aquarium because it's got glass sides. And so much of the fish that when I was in Peru that we would catch by putting the net against the riverbank near the bottom, shimming the net up against the riverbank, and voila, you've caught all of the fish that were in that area in the tangles of roots coming out of the riverbank.
That's a technique we used to use when I was little. At the local pond, we'd lie on our stomachs with our head looking over and get the net and right under the riverbank and drag it along the roof of that and pull it out, and you would get more fish there than you would any other part of the pond.
Yeah, because all of these little fish don't want to be in the middle of the river, because that's where all the big predators are. So they're hiding out where there is big root tangles and stuff against the muddied riverbank, which I really want to eventually figure out a way to create some kind of like stable 3D, essentially just trying to recreate a muddied riverbank that doesn't mess with your parameters too much. That just because I feel like there's so many fish like spawn in that, hide in that at such a niche that so many fish use that we just don't have in the
There's a
aquarium.
bunch of guys in Valencia, I think, set up a massive riverbank aquarium. They've done it online with Ivan McColgy and a few other South American biotope gurus. And they they actually modelled it on one of the biotopes from his book. I'll find the link for it, but this thing it's a 6 foot long tank, it's huge, and the mud comes right down. It's really, really, really nice the way they've done it. So maybe worth having a look at that.
Yeah, because if that's replicatable on a smaller scale, that would be amazing. Because it's like so many fish we would only catch them against the riverbank with all of these kind of roots coming down and stuff. That it's my curiosity to observe some of these behaviors that makes me want to try and replicate that to see if they will exhibit anything different to what we would normally do with them and see with them.
Just out of curiosity, is that tank there that you've got that sliding glass panel on, does it have like an open lid or is it open top, or is it just a normal glass lid on that, or how's that?
So it's got a polycarbonate lid that covers like 96% of the top, There's a slight gap at the end for a couple of pipes to come in and out, and just to allow for some air circulation to get in and out.
Yeah.
But generally, most of it's enclosed just to try and keep the humidity high enough for the kind of plants that I've got in there, and for the kind of riparian plants. Because, well, I say riparian, it's all Anubias, Bucephalandra, like all the kind of stuff that you normally get in an aquarium. It's just most of them do grow as riparian plants, or even just pure terrestrial plants in nature. And it's cool being able to see the different leaf structures and stuff once they switch from being submerged to immersed. I just quite enjoyed that as well. Eventually, I want to get all I want to fill that with. Well, if I go back to wanting it to be into Rio Negro, Rio de Mini tank, I would like to try and get some more biotope-specific plants. Not that there's many plants in that region. There's occasional bits of Hydrocotyle leucocephala, I think. And I found out recently that red root floater, the type locality for where that was described was the Rio Negro, which is quite cool because most people just say that the Rio Negro is dead, and there's like it's got nothing in it, but there's occasional bits of plants. But again, I wouldn't want to overplant it because that's not what nature's like. There's you see there's leaves and crap everywhere, and then like one little stem plant or something, and that seems to be that would be how I would replicate that, I think.
Cool. Well, I'm going to say it again. You've absolutely blown my mind, and I don't know, good way, bad way. It's been blown in many ways, and I'm questioning my life decisions with fish keeping big time now. So thank you. That basically brings us to the end of our structured questions. Mainly because our structured questions was on a totally different wavelength to where we went, and that's cool as well.
That's right.
Have you got any other questions you'd like to ask, John?
No, I'm good. It's been a really good live so far.
Yeah.
This has been a lot of things as well.
Wow, cool. So we like to end our live streams what we call a quick school of six, which is 6 short answer questions. They're not meant to stump you, but every now and then they do. So the first question that I've got for you is heads or tails? What's your call?
We'll go tails.
Cool. Are you a tea or a coffee drinker?
Traditionally, neither.
Okay.
I got into drinking a little bit of tea in Peru, but then it didn't stick. I mostly seem to avoid caffeine.
Fair enough.
Apart from maybe on a night out, but
Cool. Are we alone in the universe?
I think there's the possibility of kind of bacteria-esque things, definitely. But I'm happy to be proven wrong if there's much more advanced stuff.
Cool.
Open.
If you could have a meal with someone alive or dead, fictional or real, from any point in time, who would that be?
Now, I told myself I would prepare for these questions and then just completely forgot about it. I'm not sure. I might go someone like David Attenborough, just because I grew up watching all that kind of stuff. And it'd just be interesting to hear kind of all the places he's been.
Cool.
Yeah, he's seen a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paper, scissors, rocks. What's your first call?
I mean, my first reaction to that is who says it in that order? It's rock, paper, scissors.
No way, man.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Are you guys on the other side of the world or something? Like, gosh.
I'm gonna go rock.
Okay, cool. And what is your unicorn fish? One that you can keep, observe, breed, see in the wild, take photos of? What is that one fish that you're hanging out for?
So, I mean, I have a massive list of really niche fish that probably most people haven't heard of, that I really want to keep and breed and stuff. But my gut instinct is to say the ones that live in that top tank up there, which is my Tatia orcas, which the first time I saw a picture of one, I was captivated and was like, I need to have that, and then found out that they'd like never been in the UK.
Yeah.
And then like several years after that, I saw that they had an import of them. So I was like, yes, I need.
Nice.
So I've, over the course of about a year or so, I've built up a group of 8 of them. We've got 3 males, 5 females. So hopefully a nice ratio. And well, the unicorn bit is I desperately want to see if I can breed them. Only one person's managed to get eggs out of them so far. That is Regina Spotty, I believe. She got eggs out of them and managed to hatch a couple of them, raise them for a little bit, but didn't get further than that. But yeah, that they would be absolute dream if I could crack that. I know that there's quite a few of us working on it in the UK now that they've become a little bit more available. I know of a handful of us that have got groups of them that have bred a few other woodcats before and stuff. So yeah, them. Tatia orca or Centromochlus orca, depending on which paper you prefer. There's a bit of controversy around that.
And my last question is, where can people find you if they want to be in touch with you or keep track of your work and that kind of stuff?
So, I mean, just either just on Facebook. You'll occasionally see me on Catfish Study Group stuff and that kind of thing. And I will be, little quick plug, I will be speaking at the Catfish Study Group next year at the convention, which will be my first ever public speaking thing, which when I'm alongside speakers like Hans George Evers and Ian Fuller is a little bit daunting, especially because I found out today that I am the first speaker of the whole weekend. It's a little bit daunting, but so Facebook, that kind of thing, or I have got an Instagram account as well, EJW_aquatic. I am contemplating rebranding that at some point. I'm quite liking the name Illuminating Ichthyofauna, but not sure just yet. But for now, EJW_aquatic on Instagram. That's where I'm posting most of my fish stuff.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's greatly appreciated. Like I said, you've blown my mind and you've made me question my thoughts in fish keeping multiple times today, which is really cool. And I really, really look forward to following your progress in your career and how you go, because I think you have some fascinating ideas and thoughts. And even if you can accomplish some of what we were discussing today and document things like that, it's going to be quite phenomenal. So thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for being here today. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I most certainly have. Have a good one, team. Happy fish keeping and catch you all later.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.